Welcome back, everyone, to the deep dive. Today we're diving into something that I think a lot of us can relate to, um, burnout,
Hmm.
and how to kind of step off that crazy stress treadmill that we all seem to be on. And you, our amazing listener, actually sent in some incredible material from Emily and Amelia Nagoski's Burnout: The Secret to Unlocking the Stress Cycle. So we're gonna kind of use this deep dive to pull out the most, like, I don't know, important nuggets from this book and really try to give you a clear understanding of burnout without, like, overwhelming you with information, right? It's like a shortcut to feeling more informed and hopefully less stressed about stress itself.
Yeah, totally. And I think what I like most about this book is that it's not just kind of throwing more of those self-care cliches at you.
Right.
It's really diving deep into the science of stress, like what's actually happening in your body, and then offer some really practical strategies to kind of navigate that in your everyday life. It's about understanding what's actually going on and tackling those fundamental barriers to well-being.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, even the authors themselves come from these super interesting backgrounds. Emily Nagoski, who also wrote Come As You Are, she noticed that, like, the sections on stress and emotions in her first book were the ones that really resonated with readers. And then her twin sister, Amelia, she's a choral conductor. And you might not immediately connect that to burnout, but think about it. As a musician, she had this deep connection to, like, feeling and expressing emotion through music, but she realized she wasn't actually that great at processing those emotions in her everyday life.
Yeah.
She even jokes that this stuff, like, saved her life twice. And I think that personal experience of really needing a better way to deal with pressure kind of shines through in this book.
Oh, for sure. And ultimately, what the book really gets at is this core understanding that burnout is really fundamentally about emotional exhaustion.
Hmm.
And they do a great job highlighting how this impacts everyone, but especially women. And it's not just about feeling tired, it's about our bodies not actually fully completing the cycle of the stress response, even long after that initial, like, stressful event is over. So that's really the mystery that we're going to be unraveling in this deep dive.
Okay, let's get into it. The book actually starts with a really basic question. What is an emotion? I mean, it's more than just a feeling, right?
Yeah, totally. So think of it this way. An emotion starts with the release of neurochemicals, which are basically these brain signaling molecules in your brain,
Right.
right? And this is in response to something, maybe something you see, something you hear, maybe an interaction you have. And this release then triggers all these physiological changes throughout your whole body. So think your heart rate might go up, your hormones shift, maybe you're blushing, your facial expression changes, even your thoughts and what you feel like doing are all affected. So it's a full body, totally automatic, and like instantaneous response.
Like when you get a surprise and you get that jolt and you feel your breath kind of catch, maybe your vision even changes a bit.
Exactly, exactly.
Mm.
And here's like a key takeaway. We often experience multiple emotions at the same time,
Mm.
even in response to a single event.
Yeah.
So you might feel excited about, like, a new opportunity, but also anxious about, like, the unknowns,
Yeah.
right? But the book emphasizes that if you allow these emotions to just exist without, like, pushing them down or trying to suppress them, they'll naturally run their course. It's like a wave that rises and then recedes.
Right, right, right. Okay, so then the book introduces this idea of an incomplete stress cycle. So how is that different from just dealing with the thing that's causing you stress in the first place?
Okay, so this is where it gets really interesting. Imagine, like, picture this. You're being chased by a lion,
Mm-hmm. Right.
right? Your body's flooded with all these stress hormones getting you ready to run or fight. And then, let's say, I don't know, a freak lightning strike takes care of the lion.
Uh,
The threat is gone.
okay.
But are you, like, instantly calm and relaxed?
Mm-hmm.
No way.
Yeah.
Your heart's still pounding, you're still on high alert. So the book uses this analogy to show that just because the stressor is gone doesn't mean your body has gotten the message that it's safe to come down from that stress response.
So our bodies need something more than just the stressor being removed, basically, to kind of, like, chill out.
Yes, exactly. Your body needs a clear signal that it's safe to power down that stress response. But the thing is, in modern life, we face so many stressors that don't have a clear resolution, like a lightning-struck lion. We deal with all these ongoing pressures, societal expectations,
Mm.
and particularly for women, the book talks about this good girl conditioning, that pressure to be nice and strong and polite all the time. So we end up pushing down or ignoring those stress responses.
Right, yeah. Like you're walking down the street and someone cat calls you or says something inappropriate.
What'd you
You
do?
just keep walking, right? You don't
Yeah.
engage.
Yeah.
But internally, You might be feeling that surge of adrenaline or anger
Yeah.
or
Oh, totally. And those survival strategies, even though they're sometimes necessary in the moment, they don't actually allow your body to fully complete that physiological stress response. And so these incomplete cycles can really build up over time. The book describes it as like simmering away beneath the surface. And it's not just that classic fight or flight response either. They also talk about freeze as a stress response, where we kind of become immobilized or shut down.
so we could be walking around with all this unresolved stress in our bodies and not even realize it.
Exactly.
That sounds kind of scary. So how do we actually complete these cycles? It's not just telling ourselves to relax, right?
No, no. As the book points out, it's a physical process, not just a mental one. You have to actually do something.
Yeah.
And one of the most effective strategies they talk about is physical activity.
Oh, okay.
Even short bursts of movement, like just jumping up and down for a minute, or even having a good cry, can help release that pent-up energy.
Okay, so get the body moving, kind of get that physical tension out. What else?
Affection. It's another really powerful way to signal safety to your body. The book talks about things like a 6-second kiss, a 20-second hug, 6 minutes of snuggling, even belly laughter. They cite research by a neuroscientist, Sophie Scott, who explains that laughter is this ancient system for regulating our emotions and building social bonds.
So we've got prescribed belly laughs. I love that. Okay. What about when maybe you're not feeling up for intense exercise or big social interaction? Are there other things you can do?
Yeah, for sure. Creative expression can be a really safe outlet. Things like writing, drawing, singing, anything that helps you kind of process and move through those emotions in a constructive way. And even simple breathing exercises, like progressive muscle relaxation, where you tense and release different muscle groups. The book mentions that Emily even suggested this to Sophie, and she described it as literally unpacking baggage.
Hmm. Okay. So how do we know if we haven't been completing these cycles? Like, what are some signs?
Well, the book talks about a few things to watch out for. One is what they call the feels. These are like sudden, intense emotional releases that can happen seemingly out of nowhere.
Hmm.
But the interesting thing is, the book suggests this could actually be part of the healing process, a sign that those emotions are finally being released.
So that random wave of sadness or irritability could be a good thing in the long run.
It could be, yeah. Another sign is what Brené Brown calls chandeliering. It's that feeling when you have a totally over-the-top reaction to something seemingly small. It's like you barely bumped the chandelier, but all this pent-up stuff comes crashing down. And that often means there's some unresolved stress from the past that needs to be processed.
Yeah, I think we've all had those moments where we've kind of like overreacted to something. What else should we watch out for?
Well, they talk about turning into a bunny hiding under a hedge. So think about a rabbit. It escapes a predator and hides until it feels safe again. But when our stress cycle isn't complete, our brain can get stuck in that hiding mode, even when the stressor, that fox, is long gone. So this might look like withdrawing from life, endlessly scrolling through social media, or just wanting to stay in bed all the time. Basically, avoiding this way because your system still feels threatened.
So that urge to escape or isolate could be a sign.
Exactly. And then finally, your body might just feel generally out of whack. This could show up as chronic pain, injuries that take forever to heal, frequent infections. Because stress is a biological event, constantly activating that response without completing it can have real physical consequences. They even share a story about how understanding the science helped someone named Julie, who realized her body was paying the price for her unprocessed stress.
So becoming aware of these signs is like a really important first step. The book also goes into how to manage those things that are causing the stress, the stressors themselves.
Right. They introduce this idea of the monitor in your brain, which is basically constantly tracking how much effort you're putting in and how much progress you're making towards your goals. And for the things that you can control, they emphasize planful problem solving. So think about, like, if you're stuck in traffic, you use a GPS to find a different route. You're taking action to address the stressor.
Makes sense. But what about the stuff that's totally out of our control?
That's where positive reappraisal comes in. And this isn't about toxic positivity or just slapping a happy face on a difficult situation. But there's actually fascinating research showing that sometimes challenging situations can lead to unexpected benefits. So, for example, they mentioned studies showing that harder to read fonts can actually improve memory, or that background noise can actually boost creativity, or that diverse teams, even though they may face more initial friction, ultimately lead to more innovative solutions. So the key is to really genuinely look for that potential for growth within those difficult circumstances.
So it's about thoughtfully reframing the situation, not just pretending everything is okay.
Exactly. And then sometimes, even when you are making progress, you might still get frustrated if it's taking longer or it's harder than you thought. So they talk about redefining winning, basically adjusting your expectations. They use the example of climbing Mount Everest.
Yeah.
If you go in expecting a leisurely stroll, your internal monitor is going to freak out when it turns out to be incredibly challenging.
Yeah, we need to adjust that internal roadmap, I guess.
Yeah. So they talk about these criteria for redefined goals, kind of like SMART goals, that are soon, certain, positive, concrete, specific, and personal. They even use an example of someone named Andrew, showing how making goals feel achievable in the near future and within your control can really help.
Okay. So managing stressors, it involved either actively solving them, finding those positive angles, or adjusting our expectations. What about when we just straight up don't handle the stress in healthy ways? Like, what are some of those things that we tend to do?
Yeah, they talk about some common maladaptive responses. One is just acting fine when you're actually really struggling. So the key here is to recognize when you need help and to ask for it. Another one is avoidance, whether it's hoping the problem will magically disappear or just numbing out with distractions. And while those things can offer temporary relief, it's really important to eventually have a plan to address the issue and to even find value in working through it.
I mean, I think we've all been there, done that.
Oh, yeah.
What would you say is the most problematic response they highlight?
Probably rumination, that endless cycle of replaying negative thoughts over and over. And the book really recommends seeking professional help if you find yourself stuck in that pattern. They also share this story about Julie and her chocolate cake meltdown, which is a great example of how learning to complete the stress cycle can actually help you see those underlying chronic stressors that you might not have even realized were there. Like for her, it was actually her marriage that was a major source of stress.
So dealing with stress in a healthy way can actually bring clarity to what's causing the stress in the first place. Now, what about knowing when to just give up on something? The book uses this interesting term, foop.
Yes, FOOP, that feeling of going back and forth between intense frustration and helplessness. And they connect this to something called the explore-exploit problem from animal behavior. So think about an animal searching for food. It'll explore different areas, and when it finds a good source, it'll exploit that source until the returns start to diminish. Our internal monitor does something similar, signaling when continuing down a certain path is no longer worth the effort.
Like a squirrel that keeps digging in the same spot even though all the nuts are gone.
Exactly, exactly. The book talks about using a decision grid as a tool for deciding whether to persist or give up, but they also emphasize listening to that quiet intuition, that inner voice that says, okay, I've done what I can, time to move on. And the final indicators they mentioned are feeling totally helpless, isolated, trapped, and having this strong aversion to continuing.
Trusting that inner voice. Okay, so shifting gears a bit, the book also talks about the power of meaning in our lives.
Yeah, this is a really crucial part. They connect it to the I Want song tradition in Disney movies, seeing those as reflections of evolving aspirations. And they define meaning as knowing your strengths and using them in service of something larger than yourself.
I love that definition. So why is having that sense of meaning so important when we're talking about burnout?
Because it's so deeply connected to well-being and health. They actually cite research showing that people who have a strong sense of purpose tend to have better physical health, even a lower risk of mortality. And actively engaging with that sense of meaning, even through things like meaning-centered therapy, can have real benefits.
It's not just a nice idea, it actually has measurable effects. What are some examples of this, something larger?
They talk about connection, feeling deeply connected to others, contribution, making a positive impact on the world, and transcendence, that sense of connection to something beyond yourself. But they stress that there's no right or wrong answer here. It's about what genuinely makes you feel like your life has value and purpose. So, listener, I'd encourage you to think about those moments when you feel most alive and purposeful.
It sounds like connecting with that sense of meaning can be a real antidote to that burnout feeling. Now, the book introduces this concept called human giver syndrome. What's that all about?
Yeah, it's fascinating. They describe it as a kind of pervasive virus, and the symptoms are things like feeling obligated to be pretty, happy, calm, generous, and always attentive to the needs of others, and then feeling like a failure if you can't live up to these impossible standards. And the really tricky part is believing that these aren't symptoms at all, but just the way women should be.
It's like this pressure to give and be everything to everyone.
Exactly. And it's often self-masking because, everyone around us is operating under these same unspoken rules, treating it as normal, which reinforces our own belief that it's just how things are. And they connect it to historical examples like the expectations placed on the 1950s housewife, where this constant giving was used to kind of keep women in their place.
These invisible rules that we're all playing by. So how does this human giver syndrome relate to finding our own meaning?
Well, it actually tries to prevent us from pursuing our meaning. Because if we're constantly focused on giving to others, there's no time or energy left to figure out what really matters to us. So the key is to recognize this influence and to keep engaging with your something larger. They give a great example of Sophie, who continued to pursue her passion for science, even in really challenging environments. And they talk about how personal crises, even though they're painful, can create an opportunity for reflection and reconnecting with your values. But you have to be kind to yourself during that process.
Mm.
They even suggest an exercise where you create your origin story to help you identify your strengths and your something larger. And ultimately, that something larger is a personal inner voice, even if others don't get it.
So we have to actively pursue that purpose despite the pressure to just give, give, give. Now, after focusing on these internal tools, the book shifts to external factors. The rigged game is what they call it.
Right. They make this very deliberate transition, acknowledging that it's important to have those internal strategies, but we also have to recognize the external forces at play. And they use the example of Ralph Fiennes or even a rat in a shuttle box to explain learned helplessness, that feeling that no matter what you do, you can't escape. And they say that the patriarchy, in a lot of ways, functions like that rigged game, constantly throwing up obstacles for women.
And they give some really stark examples of misogyny, like, those harmful comments from reality TV stars and the trends of incel violence, and even that really problematic New York Times op-ed.
Yeah. And then beyond those overt examples, they highlight the chronic everyday stressors that are like background noise. We get so used to them we barely notice them, but they still take a toll. Things like the constant pressure around body image, which disproportionately affects women from a very young age. They connect the human giver syndrome to the second shift, that unequal burden of childcare and housework that women still carry.
So it actually helps keep the rigged game going, making these inequalities seem normal.
Exactly. They also introduce this concept of headwinds and tailwinds, the idea that people in dominant groups don't even recognize their advantages, while marginalized groups are acutely aware of the obstacles they face. They use the example of that study where male doctors consistently underintroduce their female colleagues, and they use the analogy of a tree growing on a cliff to show how different environments require different adaptations. But the important thing is the goal is not just to describe the problems, but to actually empower us to navigate them.
So how do we heal from this rigged game when it feels so pervasive?
First step is recognizing that it is rigged. And once you have that awareness, you can start to apply those internal tools, but with this external context. So completing the stress cycle in response to that frustration and anger that comes up when you encounter these inequalities, managing your monitor, using problem solving and positive reappraisal for societal issues, and engaging with your something larger to push back against that human giver syndrome. They even quote Gloria Steinem, who said that the truth will make you angry and that anger can be a catalyst for change. And they explain that learned helplessness can be unlearned by taking action. Even small actions can teach your body that you're not trapped. Sophie's story about staying true to her values, even in the face of oppression, is a great example of this.
Taking those internal strengths and applying them to the external reality, they dedicate a whole section to body image, the bikini industrial complex, or BIC.
Right. They really dissect this powerful and damaging force. They share Julie's experience and how her body was physically reacting to those pressures. And they emphasize this truth. Everyone is born beautiful and perfect. It's the human giver syndrome combined with the BIC that distorts that. And the statistics they cite about how young girls start worrying about their bodies are really alarming.
And they talk about the cultural influence, like that study in Fiji where the introduction of television led to more eating disorders. And they point out that this isn't new, this pressure to conform to beauty standards. They're even critical of BMI as a measure of health.
Yeah, they say health comes in all shapes and sizes. And they highlight the ridiculous consequences of the BIC, like how it can even affect our breathing. And it's really gendered, with women facing more pressure because of that human giver expectation to be attractive. Sophie's experiences in the fashion industry really highlight that, and they introduce this really compassionate idea, mess acceptance, as a more realistic goal than body acceptance.
Acknowledging that it's okay to have those conflicting feelings. What are some strategies for navigating this bikini industrial complex?
They have some great ones. One is You Are the New Hotness, redefining beauty internally.
Hmm.
They share Amelia's story about taking that dress selfie
Yeah.
and how that act of self-acceptance shifted her perspective. They also talk about how seeing more diverse body types in the media can have a real impact. And Emily has this practice called beautiful activity, where you look at pictures of diverse women and say, she is so beautiful out loud to challenge those ingrained standards. Another one is practicing seeing everyone as the new hotness. And finally, tuning back into your body's own needs instead of those external messages, like a baby learning to understand its hunger cues. The key is your body isn't the enemy. The BIC is.
It's about reclaiming that definition of beauty. Now, another essential need they discuss is connection, the bubble of love.
Right, this is key. They challenge that idea that we should be self-sufficient, not needing anyone. They say connection is a biological need, like food. And they explain co-regulation, that syncing up of our internal states when we're with others. Think about how emotions can be contagious. They also talk about the importance of early connection for brain development. And Julie's story about finally letting Jeremy help her illustrates this perfectly. They even suggest that self-care is connected to how we care for others.
We're wired for connection. What exactly is this bubble of love?
It's those energy-giving connections, fueled by trust, and what they call connected knowing. Trust, in this context, means feeling safe to be vulnerable, to share your true self. And connected knowing is understanding someone emotionally, being able to imagine their experience. There are different types of these bubbles with friends, family groups, but trust and connected knowing are essential. And it's not about being totally enmeshed. We need autonomy too.
Having those relationships where you feel truly seen, how do we know when our bubble needs recharging? What are the signs?
Well, one is being gaslit, when someone makes you question your reality. So seeking out trusted others is crucial. Another is feeling totally alone in your experience. Finding shared experiences can help. Even intense anger can sometimes signal unmet needs. And exhaustion, beyond just the physical kind, can come from emotional isolation. They share a story about students spontaneously singing "That Perfect Girl Is Gone" and how powerful that shared release was. And Sophie's evolving view of love as not just seeing yourself in another, but the creation of an us is a beautiful insight.
Recognizing those signals that we need deeper connection. Now, another vital element is rest.
They talk about Julie finally accepting help when her body couldn't take it anymore, and Jeremy's realization about taking on more responsibility, and they really redefine rest beyond sleep. Switching activities, letting your brain wander. They challenge that grit and productivity myth and the guilt associated with rest.
They even quote Audre Lorde, who said, "Caring for myself is not self-indulgence, it is self-preservation."
Right? And they explain how letting your mind wander is crucial for creativity. They talk about active rest, like cross-training for your well-being. And of course, sleep, that essential one-third of our lives. They talk about how it's not laziness and how human giver syndrome can impact women's sleep, especially around menopause.
So it's much more than just sleeping. What's their template for incorporating rest?
They suggest aiming for 7 to 9 hours of sleep, 30 minutes of stress-reducing conversation, 30 to 60 minutes of physical activity, and then a 30-minute wild card for whatever rest feels best. And they emphasize it's personalized. They address the "I don't have time" thing by showing how we could shift our time, maybe less TV and more sleep. They even suggest making an ideal 24/7 calendar. And judging yourself for needing rest makes it less effective, so self-compassion is key. Ultimately, rest matters because you matter, not just for productivity. Jeremy realized how exhausting constant caring is. So rest is about self-preservation and listening to your body.
Making rest a priority. Okay, the book ends by talking about growing mighty, which seems to be about self-compassion.
Right. They introduce the mad woman in the attic, that inner critic, and they emphasize listening to it, not silencing it. They ask why we're so much harsher on ourselves than we would be on a friend. This mad woman often develops to manage the gap between who we are and who human giver syndrome tells us we should be.
So it's like a distorted protection mechanism.
Exactly. So we should approach it with curiosity, identify the underlying sadness or fear, and offer reassurance. Self-criticism is linked to guilt and shame. And the mad woman can take many forms: a voice, a shadow, a brat, even a better version of ourselves. They also address perfectionism and its impact on our monitor.
And they address that resistance to self-compassion, right?
Yes, the fear of losing motivation, the feeling that we don't deserve kindness, the fear that healing will be too painful. But they counter that self-compassion actually improves well-being without reducing motivation, that everyone deserves kindness, and that while healing can be tough, it leads to growth. Self-compassion allows us to let go of those external standards. They bring back connected knowing and introduce turn and face the strange, creating distance from the panic to assess the situation. Self-compassion and gratitude help us bridge that gap without self-destruction. Healing allows us to heal the human giver syndrome. We can start healing now.
It's a message of resilience. So to sum up, our deep dive shows us that burnout isn't a personal failure, but a response to pressure and incomplete stress cycles. Wellness is about understanding these cycles, practicing self-compassion, connecting with others, and prioritizing rest. Recognizing the influence of human giver syndrome is important. We're wired for connection, and needing support is not weak, it's human. Wellness is an ongoing process of support and self-kindness, as the book says. Trust your body, be kind to yourself, you are enough, your joy matters. Please share this message.
It's so important.
And listener, think about one small step you can take today. Complete a stress cycle, connect with someone, or just rest and see how it feels. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for listening.